I think of myself as an explainer. I was a tech columnist for a long time, and the last 15 years or so, I've been working for CBS Sunday Morning as a science and environmental reporter. I do TV stories. I've done stories on the Great Pacific Garbage Patch and the plastics problem and some other stories. So this is the book that we're talking about. This is The Galley. So the real one has some color to it, but it's a Wampum book. It comes out in January. But you are right, Thomas, that this was not my area of specialty. The book is called How to Prepare for Climate Change, and it is literally every aspect of it. How can you prepare for it psychologically? Where should you live? Where should you invest? What should you tell your kids? What should you grow? How should you renovate your house? And how to prepare for wildfire, flood, hurricane, ticks, mosquitoes, heat waves, drought. I mean, literally prepare in every conceivable way. And actually, Thomas, our conversation was one of the very first I had. What I decided to do was just to interview every expert on every one of those topics. So I was a reporter, I wasn't the expert. So wound up being 55 expert interviews on all these subjects. And you made a great point, Thomas, which is that in some ways, you can address anxiety and despair by taking action. In other words, part of depression is feeling like you can't do anything about your problems. And so the thought was, well, if I give you some concrete things to try, you might feel better about it. So I understand that you won't have time tonight for my full 11-hour presentation on this topic, but if you like, I can dive in and give you some samples of what's in the book and what its approach is. I am going to share my screen, and you have to tell me if I hit play here, are you seeing the slide or are you seeing my notes as well?
Just the slide.
Good. Oh, good. I set up my two monitors correctly. So yeah, so this is the book. It comes out in January, and what you're getting today is How to Prepare for Climate Change, the talk. Everybody knows about the greenhouse effect, and I think that's the first psychological problem we have right there. The average person doesn't know what the greenhouse effect is, doesn't know that it's 15 or 20 degrees hotter inside a greenhouse than outside. I'm fond of saying that we should call it the dog in the car effect. I think people would understand that much better. It gets hot in there when the infrared heat can't escape. There have always been rising and falling levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, maybe every 100,000 years. But what's going on now, if you look at the far right end on the zero line there, that's happened. So that's what gives scientists this idea that something is going on, and there is a relationship between the rising carbon dioxide level and, of course, the rising temperature. You know all this, but I think the other thing we're doing as a disservice is calling it global warming, because in fact, what happens to all our natural systems is not so predictable. It's worse droughts and worse rain. It's heat waves and freak snowstorms. It's some animal species dying and others thriving and moving into new hemispheres where they don't belong, like ticks and mosquitoes. So really, global weirding is the term I think we ought to use. And overall, this is what's happening in terms of extreme weather catastrophes in all these categories. So far, Americans are still, I find, strangely unconvinced. The latest Yale Climate Communication poll says that 57% of Americans think that we have something to do with these changing times. 32% say no. 11% say they don't know. I interviewed, David Wallace Wells. He wrote the book, The Uninhabitable Earth. And I said, this is so depressing to me. And he goes, that should be thrilling to you. 25% of Americans believe that aliens walk among us. So if you can get over half of Americans to agree on anything, you're doing okay. But for the purposes of the book, it really doesn't matter. I don't care if you think it's human caused or if you think it's a natural freak of nature, what we're seeing, especially in 2020 with the floods and the hurricanes and the wildfires, doesn't matter. You still have to prepare. So there is very little chance we're going to meet the Paris goals. There's zero chance we're going to restore the climate of 1970 within our lifetimes. So my argument is what we need to do now then is to prepare for the new reality. Yes, of course, we need to keep mitigating climate change. We need to do everything in our power to slow the changes we're making, but it's too late to do only that. So these are the chapters of the book. It's where to live and so on. So the first chapter is called Acclimating to Climate Change, and it's about coming to terms psychologically with climate change. And this is where Thomas and some of his colleagues helped me out so much. Why, look at that. There's an APA reference right on the first page of the book. How do you like that? I'm making the point that, and this is one difference, Thomas, between this book and the one that you recommended to me from before. That was all about like, how do we upper middle class people preserve our lifestyle? And in fact, the climate change problem, as we know now, is worse for low income people and communities of color. So that's another theme we need to keep thinking about as we address the problem. And look what that, my gosh, look at it right on page 2. There's a quote by, quick, take a screenshot. Okay, anyway, I don't think I should talk to you guys about climate psychology because I'm the novice and you guys are the experts. So I'm gonna skip ahead to chapter 2, which is where to live. And I spent like months on these graphs. I hired a special cartographer in Serbia, actually, to make these graphs. And it shows what the United States has to look forward to by 2050. So basically, if you're thinking of moving or retiring, or you're getting out of college or the military and you have the choice of where to live, you want to think, first of all, you want to be inland to avoid sea level rise and flooding. You want to be north far enough to escape the heat and the mosquitoes and the ticks. You want to be west far enough to avoid the hurricanes, and you want to be east far enough to avoid the wildfires. And the one that nobody talks about, you need to think about fresh water. First of all, on the sea level rise thing, there's a really cool site called Surging Seas that I talk about in the book, where you can plug in how many feet of sea level rise you'd like to see for your address. And so this is Boston showing what's going to happen 9 feet from now, and it's really flooded. Sorry, that was Boston. This is Miami. I mean, Miami is like going away. If we animate that between now and 2070, and then in fact, if you pull back to see southern Florida altogether, I mean, we're losing the entire toe of the state with a 9-foot sea level rise. So, and that's predicted by, that's one of the higher estimates for 2100. They are getting now what they call sunny day flooding. So this is not when it's been raining, not when there's been a hurricane, just a beautiful sunny day. The sea level rises. It's from the combination of a high tide and the fact that you can't build seawalls around Miami because the ground in Florida is largely sandstone and the water comes up from underneath. So there's just nothing you can do. I mean, that state is going away. You probably heard about Cape Town, South Africa. 2 years ago, they were within like a couple of weeks of having no more water. I mean, they gave you an appointment. You had to show up at a water distribution center with a bucket at your appointed time. You got 1.6 gallons a day. I mean, it was dire. And even in this country, this is Lake Mead. It's the Hoover Dam Reservoir in Nevada, and it's only a third full left. And with another 100 feet, it won't be able to generate any more hydropower. And a little more after that, it won't be able to provide water to the 3 states who get their water from that dam. So anyway, so where is the answer to all those questions? Well, there are 2 spots. Basically, you want to live north of the 42nd parallel. And there's the Pacific Northwest is a great option. They escape most of the problems except for the wildfires, and they have this beetle problem. There are eating 100,000 trees a day. And they've just devastated massive parts of the state because they're no longer killed off during the winter when it's warmer now than it used to be. So their population is exploding. And then the Great Lakes. The Great Lakes literally has it all. This forgotten Rust Belt, cheap quality of life. It turns out they've got the lakes, they've got the temperatures and the fresh water. In considering these cities, by the way, I looked at more than just climate. I was also looking at, how big are these cities? What's the cost of living? Cleveland, by the way, where I grew up, turns out to be a climate haven superstar. The cost of living is insane. For $1 in New York City, you can buy $2.71 worth of stuff in Cleveland. And they also, of course, have a world-class art museum, symphony, and zoo. They have massive hospital networks, which is something else you want to think about in the climate change era. Major League baseball, football, and basketball teams, although I think they haven't won since 1950. The airport's only 15 minutes away from downtown. They have 18 beautiful parks, so on. The number one city in my research, believe it or not, came up over and over again was Madison, Wisconsin. This city is not only on 5 massive lakes, but it is absolutely beautiful. They have a zoning law that no building may be ever built taller than this Capitol building. So there's no concrete jungle to it, and it keeps winning these awards. It's the number one fittest city, nicest city, most caring city, bike-friendliest city, best city for families, best quality of life. I've actually never been there, but you just can't believe how often Madison, Wisconsin came up as a climate haven and as just a fantastic place to live. Burlington is on Lake Champlain, 500 square mile lake. So it feels like you're in a seaside town, but it's a freshwater lake. Yes, it's cold in the winter, but the winters have gotten 4 degrees warmer on average since 1970. And it's supposed to get 13 degrees warmer again in the next 30 years. Low obesity, great health, highly educated populace, lowest crime rate in the country. And really good with cheese, maple syrup, and ice cream. And Buffalo, same thing, incredible medical facilities, cheap land, really good chicken wings. So anyway, so if you ever have the choice or one of your kids says, where should I set up, which job should I accept? Think 42nd parallel. There's also a big section on where to invest. And at first I thought this might be a little crass, like, should I be guiding people to making money from this horrible crisis? And the experts I talked to said, hell yeah, because every time you talk somebody into investing into a green company, you are in effect helping them. You're helping the planet. So you are mitigating the problem. It turns out these are becoming very good investments. If you'd invested $1,000 in 2017, clean energy companies, you would have seen a 60% return on your investment. If you'd invested in a petroleum industry company, you'd be down 12%. So your first thought might be, okay, solar energy, let's invest in solar energy. And true, solar energy is going through the roof. In fact, last year was a historic moment when renewable energy in America, use in trillion BTUs, actually exceeded coal for the first time in history, right there at the right end there. And this is my favorite joke in the whole thing. It is so cheap to put up solar and so useful that the Kentucky Coal Mining Museum put solar panels on its roof. It's so fantastic. And they're saving $10,000 a year in energy. So solar is going so nuts because the price of solar is coming down so much. And that is why it's not a good investment. That's the rub, right? You don't want to buy something that's a commodity where the Chinese are just flooding the market with dirt cheap. It's a race to the bottom. Same thing with wind. Wind is also super taking off in the US. And that's because the price is getting lower and lower and lower. Solar and wind in many parts of the country are now cheaper than any other kind of power. But again, that makes it not such a great investment. So what my experts told me is that a better bet is to invest in the utility companies that are using solar and wind, switching to solar and wind. And why are they doing that? Because 38 states now have mandates that the states themselves must switch to renewable energy. Like, for example, New York, California, and Hawaii have to be 50% renewables by 2030. Where are they going to go to get that? To these companies like Xcel Energy and NextEra that are getting their energy from wind and solar. So invest in those companies and you are in effect investing in this big green wave. And then there's some good sectors to bet on: fresh water processing, machinery, transport, piping, of course, drought resistant crops. I mean, our breadbasket of this country is baking. They've had terrible yields in some of the recent years because of either the heat waves or the flooding. So Monsanto and Syngenta are developing genetically bred crops that do better in the new climate. That would be a good bet. And speaking of which, the farmable areas of the country are shifting north as the earth warms. And that means there's going to be new farmers in new places. And that means they're going to need to buy farming equipment. So this Morgan Stanley guy said, John Deere, baby, Navistar. That's where you want to put your money. You might think of electric cars, and indeed, electric cars are taking off. These are the number of electric car models coming out from every single major manufacturer. And again, it's supply and demand. These are the countries that are mandating that gas cars no longer be sold in their countries. I mean, 2030 that's 10 years from now. I mean, we're going to be alive for that. That's soon. So the car companies are responding to this. So yeah, you could invest in a Tesla or something like that, but wouldn't it be smarter to look upstream and invest in the parts that they're all going to need, like the batteries? It turns out there are 4 companies that make the batteries. They're all in Asia, and there's no other companies that make car batteries for electric cars, or the components. These are the wires and the connectors. Or how about the lithium mines that get the lithium for the lithium ion batteries? That's like the new petroleum. So Albemarle is an American company, and then there's this Chilean company. They're the ones getting the lithium out of the earth. That would be a good place to look. And then the last thing I thought I would show you is this chapter called Ready for Anything. There's certain things that every climate crisis have in common that for little or no money, every single person should consider and could consider. I'm sure you've heard of the go bag. It's just this thing you'll have in your front closet with a couple days worth of trail mix and first aid kit and flashlights and stuff that you can grab and go. And the thing they always forget about in the survivalist manuals is you also need this note taped to your go bag that lists the things you need to grab on your way out, like your medicines, your ID, and your wallet, your phone charger. You can't have those in the bag for years. Those you need to grab on your way out. There's also this fantastic app, and I don't understand why every single person here doesn't go download this free Red Cross app tonight. It's free. What you do is you set up the locations, the addresses of you and people you care about, your parents, your kids, your best friends, 3 or 4 locations, and then it goes dormant and it monitors those places for emergencies. And if it ever gets an early warning of any kind of hazard, hurricane, tornado, flood, wildfire, whatever, then this app that you've forgotten all about suddenly chirps and gets your attention and lets you know you need to be aware that your cousin is flooding or whatever. And other than that, you can completely forget about it. One thing a lot of disasters have in common is drinkable water goes away. Every flood, fire, and hurricane. Many cities, 700 cities in the United States, have a pipe system under the city that combines rainwater overflow with sewage. So in Chicago, 50 times a year, people report getting raw sewage coming up from their sink basins because the sanitation plants on the lake can't handle the overflow, so it starts backing up into people's homes. So you have to think, what am I going to drink when one of these things happen? It turns out you have a lot of drinkable water already in your house. You can drink the water in your hot water heater. That's purified, incoming, clean water. You shut it off at the top. You drink it out of the bottom, let it cool. Your toilet has a few gallons of fresh water. I don't mean the bowl. unless you're a golden retriever. No, the tank that has fresh water in it. You can buy these cheap plastic storage tanks. As long as you bleach them out first, they can keep water sanitary for 5 years, says the FDA. And then there's water in your pipes. If you have a multi-story home, you've got a lot of water in there. Open up the top faucet to let the air in, and then go to the ground floor or the basement and get the fresh water out there. And there's also a lot of places you can get gray water, not water you want to drink, although that bathtub I wouldn't mind drinking out of, but water that you can wash with and wash your dishes and wash your clothes and water the garden with. A lot of people buy these cheap rain barrels. Chicago is giving away those rain barrels to the citizens. Isn't that brilliant? Because every time they do that, they're keeping 100 gallons of water out of those overstressed rain tunnels, rain pipes, your hot tub, your pool. The other thing you need to think about in times of extreme crisis is power. The power always goes out here in Connecticut. Power goes out 2 or 3 times a year, inevitably during a cold snap. You can buy generators for a wide range of capacity and prices. This one on the left is one of those gasoline ones. They're really loud and smelly, and you have to keep filling them up with gas the longer the power outage goes. The one to its right is called an inverter. It's the same thing, but it's twice as expensive, but very quiet, and it's not smelly. And then you can get like these standby generators that come on automatically when the power's out. It doesn't have to fire your whole house up. Like we finally got one here at our house that just powers the kitchen, the living room, and 1 bedroom. So if it's the middle of winter and we have no power, like Hurricane Sandy, we were without power for 6 days and froze our tails. And there's even like little cheap ones. This one's on Amazon. It's hand powered. You crank it, and that's enough to charge your phone and give you a flashlight and listen to the emergency radio. So these are all ways for various amounts of money to be a little more prepared. And the last thing that goes down is the cell towers. Hardly anyone talks about this. I mean, 9/11, we heard about the cell towers going down, but every hurricane, every wildfire, the cell towers go down. Now Verizon and those guys do have these mobile towers. You can see them on the left side. They're kerosene powered, and they wheel them into place, or sorry, diesel powered, wheel them into place to replace the ones that have gone down in the storm. But guess what? In California, they couldn't use those because it was a wildfire. They couldn't even get into those areas. So the plan is what you make with your family now when the weather is fine. It's not complicated. You figure out 4 locations where if in a crisis you can't reach each other because the cell towers are down, you're gonna meet. So the first spot is, where can we meet in the house in case of a storm or a hurricane? You want to pick a place that doesn't have windows, a basement, even a closet or a corner of a bedroom that doesn't have windows, where you and the kids can be safe. Then you want to find a place in the neighborhood, like that old crooked tree across the street. And that's if you can't get into the house, or not supposed to. If there's a fire or a flood, you'll know where to meet. If the kids are coming home from school, they know where to go. Then you want a place in town if there's some kind of daytime disaster and you're at work and the kids are at school, no one knows where to coordinate. And the fourth one is an out-of-town spot if the city is ordered to evacuate. You all know to meet at the Costco in Norwalk or whatever. And also a really great idea, when the weather's nice like now, you specify one out-of-town contact who can be sort of your HQ as you all are scattered and trying to find each other. And just having this like written on a laminated sheet on your fridge or your bulletin board, and you review it once a year, it's just a big piece of mind. It's a big relaxation thing to know that if the worst comes to pass, you guys know what you're going to do. I had a big discussion with my editor on the gun question, because there's social unrest is increasing these days, and it's terrifying. And we all know the statistics about, gun ownership. It depends on sort of where you live and what your family culture is, whether you're comfortable having a gun in the house. But I talked to this one survivalist expert, and he's a gun owner, gun nut, in fact. And he said, you know what? I would tell your readers, the gun isn't the best way to be safe when society is falling apart. I would go to Home Depot and get myself some solar charged lights, because automatic lighting deprives potential home intruders of decent hiding places. They don't care about robbing your house. They just want to rob someone's house. So if yours is lit up, they're going to go for one that offers better concealment. And he also told me about this category of flashlight. They're called tactical flashlights. They're what police and rescuers use. They're so bright. They're so bright. They literally disorient you. Like you take a step back and they blind you. And I was reading about these on Reddit, and one guy said, I've had good luck with these things. Just shine it in the guy's face and say, hey, back the fuck up. I've diffused quite a few sketchy individuals. So kind of a great alternative to like the gun question if you can't quite bring yourself there. And then the last chapter in the book is where to find hope. And this was the most surprising part of my research. I entered this project depressed, like so many people, that the climate is going to hell and our government is doing nothing about it, scrubbing the term climate change from the government websites. I mean, massively upsetting. It turns out, though, that the world and the country kind of marched on without the president. I mean, it turns out that our greenhouse gas emissions are going down in the United States. Largely that's because of natural gas instead of coal, but they are going down. In 24 states, they vowed to meet the Paris Accord without the United States. Like, these states are going to meet it with or without the federal government. And these cities all over the country, some of them have already gotten there. New investments in green technologies, as we mentioned, green technologies are good investments, and that's why more and more investment is pouring in. So it's a virtuous cycle. And then the really cool thing where I come from is the giant corporations that we think of as the polluters. A lot of these giant, massive companies are making enormous strides. The tech companies, I'm sure you've heard, Google, Alphabet's the mother company, the biggest consumer of renewable energy on Earth. They've been 100% renewable since 2017. Amazon's going to be carbon neutral by 2040. Apple will be carbon neutral by 2030. I don't know if you guys are geeky enough to know about the scopes of being carbon neutral. Like, if I'm Apple, scope 1 means my factories. How much emissions do they put out? Scope 2 is all my factories plus all my suppliers. The company that makes my screens and my speakers, and I have to take responsibility for their emissions too. And scope 3, which is very difficult, that's my suppliers and my operations and my customers. So to say I'm going to be totally carbon neutral, scopes 1, 2, and 3 is an astonishing achievement. And Apple says they're going to get there. And Microsoft even says they'll be not only carbon negative by 2030, pulling out more carbon than they produce, but by 2050, they intend to remove all the carbon they have ever produced since the founding of the company. No one knows if they're going to make these goals. They're just goals. And a lot of it is some fishy shuffling of numbers with carbon, like buying carbon offsets, which are controversial because you're basically paying someone poorer than you not to pollute. But it's a noble effort. So ultimately, there are really two reasons to prepare. One is the obvious one, so you'll be ready when bad things happen. And two is the psychological reason. If you take action to prepare yourself, you feel better. Your anxiety level goes down because you have felt like you have some control over your circumstances. So those are ultimately my goals with the book and with the project. I do believe decarbonization will come. Everyone I spoke to believes it will come. You look at the young people and how much they care, and it seems inevitable. But we're starting too late. The climate has already changed. So my final words are, until that time comes, prepare. So there's a brief 20-minute condensation of the 600 pages.
Wow. Thanks, David.
Let's see, can I stop sharing? I think so. I'll figure it out. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Stop sharing. Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Well, thank you. Thanks to you. When Thomas mentioned this event, he said, "Hey, you can practice your talk," and that's exactly what that was. You were my guinea pigs for giving it a try.
That's great. Well, Amy, you can stop the recording and we'll move into our discussion, but this is